my God. We dressed for the occasion today. I think you should stand up and give everyone a clear view.
I do like it.
Let's make sure to get it on camera, too.
We've got some more if anyone wants one. We've been talking
All right.
for 30 minutes.
We'll talk more about the swag after the session. GM, everyone. How's everyone doing? OK, everyone's asleep. GM, everyone.
GM.
How's everyone doing? Thank you. Hey, everyone. I'm Lee. I am a general partner and co-founder at Variant Fund. We are an early-stage venture fund focused on crypto investing. And today, we're here to talk about how modularity drives the next wave of DeFi lending. Michael, Laurence, it's so great to be up here on stage with you guys today. You two are two of the biggest builders in DeFi right now. And you guys also have something in common, which is that both of you guys have been involved in pretty notable DeFi hacks in the past. I would love to start off with just brief intros. Why are you still here? Why are you still building in DeFi? Michael, let's start with you.
I think there's probably something wrong with both of us, to be honest. Should say that right away. So yeah, I'm Michael, co-founder and CEO of Euler Labs. What is Euler? It was a lending protocol that we started building back in 2020 during the height of DeFi summer. I started building that. Before that, I used to be an academic. I used to be a research scientist studying game theory at Oxford. And I just found everything that's happening in DeFi summer really, really fascinating. And so jumped ship. By 2023, Euler was one of the most popular lending protocols on Ethereum. It was the third largest. And it was absolutely flying. And the year looked really promising ahead and everything. And then a really niche part of the Euler code base was exploited with great effect in March of that year, draining 200 million in assets from the protocol. And after a lot of hard work from the team, we managed to recover all of the assets. 240 million were returned back to users in the end, just a few months later. Absolutely harrowing experience, but one that we've come back much stronger from as a team. We learned an awful lot about ourselves and particularly our resilience and everything. And really excited and energized to be here now and see all the excitement about the Euler V2 that we announced just a week or so ago. So Euler V2 is also a lending protocol, but it's a modular lending protocol that we think is going to unlock a massive amount of flexibility for lenders and borrowers, more than they've ever seen before. And we think it will form the base layer of a liquidity layer for the whole of DeFi in the years to come. So excited to tell you a bit more about that as we go along.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll definitely delve into Euler V2 and what that means. But first, turning it over to you, Laurence, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yep. Can't tell if the mic. Oh no, the microphone is working. I'm Laurence. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Wildcat protocol. It is a move towards the flip side of what Euler V2 would be focusing on, which is under-collateralized credit on chain. Prior to all of that, I was at Indexed Finance, which I imagine we'll talk about at some point. But I was also an academic. I finished a PhD in compiler theory, and then I worked as a risk reporting analyst and model risk quant at Standard Chartered for years and years. I started doing Ethereum development the day after the parity multi-sig freeze because that was my moment of realizing that I'd spent years programming around money, but now I could program money directly, which was an irresistible nerd snipe. Why am I still around? I couldn't see myself doing anything else. This kind of, program building in an adversarial environment is, to a certain type of person, the only thing you could imagine yourself doing.
Yeah, I sense a bit of masochism in common between the two of you, which, I don't know, is that a British trait?
It's unique to the part of Leeds that we live in.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a great place, so we're used to it.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Michael, I wanted to start with Euler. So you've had a lot of ups and downs over the last year. To say the least, including the infamous $200 million hack of Euler, and then the subsequent recovery, which seemed rather miraculous. And you chronicled all of this in a blog post that was aptly titled War and Peace, and it was approximately the length of Tolstoy's War and Peace.
Sure, War and Peace.
And so, given that that essay exists, we won't get into the weeds of all of that and what unfolded there. We'll let people read it for themselves. But I would love to talk a bit more about the key lessons that you learned from that experience and how it informed Euler V2.
Yeah, sure. I mean, something that I guess is obvious coming into the industry, but that was really like brought home to us was that building smart contracts that secure millions of dollars is really, really hard. I mean, Euler V1, as a team, we always had this philosophy to build, things slowly and thoughtfully and carefully. When we first joined in 2020, there was a bit of a culture of like build fast and break things, and that was never something that we really believed in. So we always thought, build slowly and thoughtfully. And then, Euler was exceptionally well audited. We had the largest bug bounty of any lending protocol. We'd done formal verification, all the rest of it. And yet still, this niche part of the code base, someone managed to find an exploit. So it's really a lesson, not just to us, but to everyone else, I guess, about how difficult it is to secure smart contracts. And I think the fact that we were so thoughtful about stuff did earn us a lot of goodwill from the community, and we were really, really grateful for all that when the exploit happened and the recovery happened. But yeah, a key lesson we learned was about the team itself and how resilient we were and how hardworking we could be, how we could support one another. And ultimately, that same team is back now. We're building V2 in that same slow and thoughtful manner, not trying to rush things, with a real heavy emphasis on security. One of the things that we're really trying to do with V2 is abstract all the best bits of V1 and abstract all the best bits of a lending protocol generally, and then repackage that and rebuild it up in a modular fashion. And with that modularity comes, a lot of flexibility for the end user, but it also allows you to build this really robust, complex product at the end, which every component, every individual component has been really well tested and is really easy to understand. So that's one of the key lessons is simple is better, modular is better.
Yeah, so you really took this opportunity to rethink the design of Euler from the ground up and build it in a more modular fashion. Laurence, turning it over to you, obviously you've also been through a lot from your days at Index Finance. I would love to hear about the lessons from that and how it led you now to Wildcat.
Yep. So I wouldn't say there was a direct path to Wildcat from it. Index Finance was a play at moving ETF funds into a tokenized manner using balancer LPs. That was a $16.5 million hack. And the subsequent kind of wrangling and filing of lawsuits around that really kind of made me realize where the barriers were or the boundaries between the existing legal system. Because the law has not caught up to DeFi yet. We tried to fit square pegs in round holes when it comes to dealing with the aftermath of these things in the legal system, which drove me to law school to try and become a better DeFi citizen. I mean, I've always been a believer that DeFi is taking the best bits of financial systems and moving them into a place where we have no middlemen that are extracting fees. I do think that moving on to the next thing, once ETF stuff has now, there are other mechanisms for it that are perhaps custodial, but I believe that credit mechanisms on chain are one of the remaining white whales that we really need to solve for a digital economy on rails. I think we all use over-collateralized protocols, these margin protocols, but the growth, we do need a mechanism for cleanly introducing effectively lending, which is leveraged by proxy on credit. And so I've been working on that for the last few months. We've been live for 3. Lessons that I would have learned, I think I've always been quite paranoid about security, and I think that's certain about smart contract security because, as Michael says, it is hard to work in this kind of Turing-complete environment, when fuzzing's not really well developed. But you can gate things. There are mechanisms to do that now, and I've started embracing these, which have some costs, but you breathe a bit easier.
Right. I wanted to level set on the title of this panel, which is about modularity in DeFi. And actually, I think it would be helpful to just level set on definitionally what does modularity mean? It's a buzzword that is taking off right now, but can you share your definitions of modularity?
Yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment with this. Where you see it all over the place, this word. It's definitely a buzzword of the time. For me, modularity means that Modular code means something that's really short, really simple, does one thing, and it does it exceptionally well, and it's easily audited, easily tested, and that it can also be used, like Money Lego itself, it can also be used and composed with other modules. So I think, yeah, when you're building a product for things, you can either start really from the the top down. You find something that uses one, and you really just want to target that exact thing. And you end up building this really big monolithic code base that has a lot of state in there, and it's very, it's very hard to go from that when you build top down to then extend it and test it and make sure every single code path has been tested. With modularity, I think for me it's about building, identifying and abstracting key components of a system, wrapping them up into these modular components, and then building back up, back from the bottom up towards a more complex product. But I also wrote recently about modularity that there's different flavors, right? There's not just modularity by itself isn't necessarily useful if it's chaotic. And I think if you look at in the past, if we go back to the Web 2 world, when you look at the development of things like Windows and Apple and Mac, Windows was a modular system. It was an open system. People could contribute their own applications to it, but it was an absolute mess. That's what I would refer to as chaotic modularity. The modules were built, but they weren't built in a way that they were designed to work and fit together very nicely. And so you had drivers for your printer and it was just awful. And Mac, on the other hand, I think they also built using these modular design principles, but every app felt like it was designed to work with every other app on the Mac, and so I call that cohesive modularity. And so with Euler, in the long run, like what's our sort of long-term ambition for building in DeFi is to build in a cohesively modular way, so that we have Euler as a lending protocol, and then in the future other protocols to come that can be composed with one another as money Legos that have been really well designed to fit together. Right now, when people trade in DeFi, any given trade can often end up touching 4, 5, 6 different protocols, each of which has its own fee. There's like hook fees and UI fees, and there's lending fees and swap fees and so on, and your exposure to different risks and different governance systems and so on. And in the long term, our ambition is to build a suite of apps which minimize fees for users, minimize friction between them, and work cohesively together in a modular way.
Right, so there's basically like different degrees of modularity and different ways that modularity could be implemented, and there are different user experiences that arise from that, ranging from kind of the mess that you described with Microsoft products all the way to a much more cohesive end user experience that is still modular.
Yeah.
Lawrence, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we disagreed about this yesterday, where things that you'd call modules, I would call primitives in lending. I mean, the word modular has been shadowed now completely by Celestia, where we talk about data availability. But I mean, I more of the take that kind of I would still consider a protocol modular if you could deploy different functionalities as sets of contracts which supported functionality all under the same rollup. So in my context, it's a fixed duration market versus a liquid market versus one with a call option. They're all part of the same thing, but they're independent networks. But beyond that, nothing to add for yourself.
Right, so modularity, primitives, all kind of describing relatively the same concepts. Yeah. I want to bring in the idea of risk management into this conversation about modularity and how modularity impacts risk management. So Euler, V2, and Wildcat are taking pretty different approaches when it comes to risk management. Can you explain each of those respective approaches and why you decided to go with that?
So, I mean, first things first is to say that in DeFi, the idea that I think a sort of founding principle is that risk management is that you should have freedom of choice. And really, it's up to you to determine what your risk-reward preferences are. Like, if we just ask each other now what our risk-reward preferences are, they'll be all really different, and they'll change day to day depending on our context. Like, Leah, I know you like skiing. I can't imagine it. That just sounds awful. The risk-reward just doesn't sort of map up for me.
Yeah, so
when it comes
every
to
user can express their own preferences and agency.
Yeah. So, it's about having agency, and But then, yeah, if we look at the differences between Euler and Wildcat and sort of dig in there a little bit, I think fundamentally they take different approaches because they're different types of lending application. Euler's over-collateralized lending, and in an over-collateralized system, as long as you can value the collateral and ensure that the collateral is always worth more than the assets being taken out in loans, then ultimately you can encode a whole variety of different mechanisms in a smart contract that can do that without needing recourse to any legal text, right? So with over-collateralized lending, you can do everything in the smart contracts, I would argue. And that's a little bit different to what happens with Wildcat, I guess. But then with over-collateralized lending, even within that, there's multiple different models of how you can manage risk. I wrote an article recently about paternalism versus the invisible hand in risk management of lending protocols, because I think even among among lending users of lending protocols, there's two different types of users that we see today. Some users like to deposit passively into a lending protocol and have the risk managed for them. Their expectation is that their assets will be in there. The parameters will ensure that changes in the economic environment will be handled by the protocol itself. And typically with that, the risk reward might be the reward might be a little bit lower, but the risk is kind of managed. On the other hand, you have more like power users, so I suppose, who want to take more risk and go for higher rewards. And with that, they have to actively manage their positions, and they're deploying their assets into a spectrum of different isolated pools, maybe. And with that, you end up with this sort of free market emergence of a risk management system where the invisible hand of sort of capitalist, free markets ends up determining what the risk reward is across the spectrum as a whole. So yeah, we've one of the benefits of the modular architecture of Euler is that it allows us to build that optionality into the protocol for users of different types. Some users will want the paternalistic model, and they can have that, and other users will want real immutable pools that can't be touched, where the risk is they actively manage their own risk preferences, and that's exactly what Euler is built to drive, and that's why I think it will be this liquidity layer in the end for DeFi, because of all the flexibility in the system to really manage your own risk reward preferences.
Yeah, I mean, we are focusing on a completely different type of risk than, if you're dealing with something that's under-collateralized, your risk is that of defaults rather than liquidation. So, there always, when you're dealing with something like that, you've got two sides of things. You've got, in my context, is a smart contract risk, and you've got a default risk. So we will allow people to utilize Wildcat. They can create insane markets if they wish. If someone on the other side that wishes to lend to them decides that's in their risk-reward function, absolutely fine, go for it. Whereas what we do, one of the lessons that we learned was instead the risk that we can mitigate, which would be the smart contract side of things, we very heavily clamped down on, such as we are specifically whitelisting call data access into functions, which that's where we can control things. So like the risk of the actual lending itself is very much to themselves in a similar way, but when it comes to contract interaction, very much locked down. That does look like it takes away some of the modularity, but the reality is that the debt tokens that are issued as a result are as much a money Lego as anything else.
That makes sense. So it sounds like the commonality is really allowing users to express their own preferences and choose their own level of risk tolerance and to participate accordingly.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Michael, I wanted to talk about something that you mentioned in your recent post about Euler v2, which is about this vision of a flourishing DeFi ecosystem that includes real-world assets, non-fungible tokens, IOUs for uncollateralized lending, peer-to-peer lending, and Oracle-free lending. That all sounds great, but how is that going to become a reality?
Well, I would say it is already becoming a reality right as we speak. Right, there's lots of great projects launching that are tokenizing things from the real world, whether that's equities or treasuries or bonds. These things are slowly but surely they're becoming tradable within DeFi. And I think that's really exciting. For the past few years, DeFi has been a kind of isolated environment. Crypto as a whole, it's been disconnected from traditional finance. And that's slowly but surely changing, thanks to protocols like Euler and others that are enabling those assets to come on and mix in with other crypto native assets, I suppose. We're seeing yields from treasuries now slowly flowing in on chain, which I think is going to help the sector grow. It's also great for traditional finance, where there's been a dearth of innovation for decades now. I remember when I first left university for just a few months, I ended up working at the Royal Bank of Scotland back in 2008 when the crash happened, and I just couldn't believe how bad the computer systems were, the risk management systems. Everything was just decades old, and now with DeFi has just been moving so quickly. DeFi rails and the code bases are really advanced, and it's I think there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of growth opportunities for real-world assets to come onto DeFi, and not just so that you can earn treasury yield by holding a tokenized real-world asset, but so that you can trade these things. We have these free, fair, open markets that are very transparent and much more efficient than the closed systems in TradFi. So yeah, again, in terms of Euler and how it will enable this, a lot of lending protocols today just allow you to lend and borrow fungible tokens, so regular ERC20s. But with Euler, you can plug out those things and plug in NFTs as collateral, or use hooks like Uniswap v4 to encourage use of tokens with maybe secondary transfer restrictions and that kind of thing. And so yeah, I think the modularity of Euler v2 is really going to allow massive growth of that's the sector that we're already seeing today.
Right, so it's like the modular design of Euler actually enables the system to scale more to new types of assets that aren't really able to participate in DeFi right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just simply wouldn't have been possible, and with some of the more legacy things, even Euler v1, like Aave, Compound, other competitors, you can't just throw those things into the system. And the nice thing about Euler v2 is it's so flexible, and that's really powerful for giving users the options to do anything. You mentioned like uncollateralized, that in principle could be done, although I'll try not to, make Laurence's protocol. Yeah, you'll be all right.
Yeah, that's really cool. So as we start to wrap up here, I was wondering if you guys could share some predictions or thoughts on the road ahead for DeFi over the next 12 to 24 months. Like, what do you see unfolding from here in terms of both the opportunities as well as challenges?
I think we keep banging on about this. The thing that we need is some sensible regulation. We are not getting it out of America anytime soon. But if you look over to Europe, we're starting to see some really good, sensible, well thought out things from, say, the UK Law Commission. There's consideration going into this in the EU as well. Like MiCA 2 is coming out, which is focusing on DeFi, for better or worse, but there is thought going into it. I think the thing that we need to be aware of as we head into, kind of what we will now call the next cycle is just avoiding CDeFi platforms. This opacity breeds collapse. I think we need to be very careful of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that on the regulation side. I think the elephant in the room is still DeFi smart contract risk, but I think we're seeing it might not look like it to outsiders, but there's actually a huge amount of progress when you work internally and you work with all the top security firms and so on. You see a huge amount of progress behind the scenes in the developments in formal verifications and all the tooling for fuzzing and all the rest of it. It's all getting incrementally better day by day. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic that we will see a much better year this year than we did last year and the year after and so on. Things will just keep improving. So I think that's really exciting. And then with that, that's been one of the things perhaps holding back more institutional demand for getting involved in DeFi. And so as that improves and with things like modularity helping pave the way for, I think we'll see more real world assets and things come and change. More that sort of meme of the institutions are coming might actually finally.
It turns out they are actually. This time is different.
It actually maybe is. So yeah.
Got it. So the institutions are coming, and hopefully smarter regulation is coming. Although don't hold our breaths on that.
Fingers crossed, right?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can make that a reality. Michael, Laurence, thank you so much for being here on stage today. This was awesome. Let's give it up for Michael and Laurence.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Good job.